The city's most prestigious gala was held in a hall so grand that even the walls seemed to sparkle with pride. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, scattering light across the polished marble floors. Expensive perfumes filled the air, blending with the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and music from a live orchestra. Guests in designer suits and glittering gowns moved gracefully, each step carrying the confidence of wealth and status. It was the kind of night meant to celebrate power. Among the luxury cars that lined the entrance, one black vehicle stood out, not for its shine but for the man who stepped out. He was a black CEO, known across the business world as a self-made leader, respected for his brilliance and admired for his success. Yet tonight he did not walk alone. At his side was his mother, an elderly woman in a simple but elegant dress, her eyes wide as she took in the dazzling lights. She did not belong to this world of diamonds and champagne, but she belonged to him, and that was enough. For years she had worked tirelessly, sometimes in kitchens, sometimes cleaning houses, just to put food on the table and send her son to school. She had lived without comfort so that he could one day rise. Every sacrifice she made, every tear she hid, had built the man who now stood tall beside her. And now, on this proud night, he wanted her to sit by his side, not in the shadows where she had spent most of her life. The photographers turned their cameras toward them, flashes bursting like fireworks. Some guests raised their eyebrows, others smiled politely, but the CEO walked forward with quiet confidence, guiding his mother by the arm. She held onto him tightly, her heart beating fast. She had never attended such an event before. To her, every corner looked like a palace. As they entered the hall, staff in crisp uniforms hurried to greet them. The organizers had reserved a VIP seat at the very front for the CEO, a place of honor. But he refused to sit there alone. Instead, he led his mother forward and gently pulled out the chair, seating her in the front row where the brightest lights shone. He then took the seat beside her. For his mother, it was overwhelming. She sat stiffly at first, unsure how to carry herself among so many polished strangers. But her son's reassuring hand on hers calmed her. He leaned close and whispered, "This is your night too, Mama. You deserve this seat more than anyone." She smiled softly, her eyes glistening. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe deeply and enjoy it. She was not just a tired woman who had once scrubbed floors to keep her family alive. Tonight, she was the mother of a man who had climbed to the top, and he had placed her in the highest seat he could. All around, guests whispered. Some admired the gesture, impressed by the CEO's devotion. Others looked away, uncomfortable, their pride unable to accept that a woman of such humble appearance sat among them in the front row. But the CEO did not care. To him, his mother's presence there was the truest symbol of his success. The music swelled and speeches began. The CEO sat tall, his eyes fixed on the stage, but every so often he looked at his mother. He wanted to see the joy on her face, the pride in her smile. She sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her heart swelling with gratitude. For her, this seat was not just a chair, it was the recognition of every battle she had fought in silence. The night moved forward, glittering and golden, but for the CEO one thing mattered most, that his mother was finally sitting where she belonged. Neither of them knew what was about to come, nor how quickly this moment of pride would turn into one of humiliation. But for those few minutes, as the chandeliers glowed and the cameras flashed, the boy she had raised and the man he had become were united in a single powerful truth. Success meant nothing without honoring the one who sacrificed everything. The gala had only just begun when the moment of insult unfolded, as sharp and cutting as a blade. The orchestra played softly, glasses clinked in the background, and the host was preparing to welcome the guests of honor. The black CEO sat tall in his seat, his mother beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She still couldn't believe she was sitting in the very front row, in a seat marked for the powerful and admired. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in the back of the room, serving or watching from afar. She was part of it, honored openly by the son she had sacrificed everything for. But dignity, as she was about to discover, is fragile when arrogance enters the room. Two staff members in crisp uniforms walked briskly toward the front row. Their expressions were cold, businesslike, as if they had been sent on an unpleasant task. One leaned down, his voice sharp but hushed, addressing the CEO's mother directly. "Ma'am, I'm afraid you cannot sit here. This seat is reserved for another guest." The mother froze, confused. She glanced at her son, unsure if she had heard correctly. The CEO's jaw tightened, but he remained silent for the moment, his eyes narrowing. Before he could speak, the second staff member reached down, gesturing for her to stand. "Please, ma'am," he said more firmly this time. This seat is for an important socialite who has just arrived. We'll need you to move to the back row. Gasps rippled from nearby guests. Some turned their heads, whispering behind polished hands. Others pretended not to notice, sipping their champagne as though nothing unusual was happening. But everyone had seen. Everyone had heard. The CEO's mother's heart sank. She had been nervous from the start, afraid she didn't belong in such a glamorous place. Now those fears were being confirmed in the cruelest way possible. She lowered her eyes, embarrassed, and slowly began to rise, her frail hands pressing against the arms of the chair. The CEO placed a hand on her arm, his touch firm, stopping her. His eyes burned as he looked up at the staff. "This is my seat," he said evenly, his voice deep with restrained anger. "And she is my guest. My mother." But the staff, blinded by arrogance and a desire to please the arriving socialite, ignored his words. One of them shrugged slightly, his tone dismissive. "I understand, sir, but this section is reserved for specific guests. We've been instructed to seat Miss Caldwell here. Your mother can be accommodated elsewhere." Elsewhere. The word cut deeper than any insult. The mother, trembling, touched her son's hand gently. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She was trying to protect him, to prevent a scene. She had endured worse humiliations in her life, being ignored, being judged, being looked down upon. But tonight, it stung differently because it came in the presence of her son's success. Slowly she allowed the staff to guide her away. They led her down the aisle, past rows of watching eyes, until they placed her in a back row chair, far from the lights, far from the honor her son had wanted for her. The CEO sat motionless, his eyes following her every step. His face was calm, but inside him a storm raged. Guests stole glances at him, curious if he would react. Some expected him to brush it off, to stay silent in the name of politeness. But those who truly knew him, those who understood the depth of his respect for his mother, recognized the dangerous stillness in his eyes. Moments later, as if on cue, the white socialite entered the hall. She swept in gracefully, wearing a glittering gown and smiling at the audience as though the entire evening was crafted for her. The staff bowed slightly, leading her to the seat they had stolen from the CEO's mother. She sat with pride, basking in the attention, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, about the pain caused by her presence. The orchestra continued to play, the crowd resumed its chatter, but for the CEO nothing felt the same. His mother, the woman who had worked her hands raw so he could rise, had been humiliated in front of him. And though he had not yet moved, not yet spoken, those who watched closely could see it. The look in his eyes that promised this insult would not go unanswered. In 5 minutes, the entire room would understand who they had disrespected. The music in the grand hall softened as heads turned toward the entrance. The moment everyone had been waiting for arrived with practiced elegance. The socialite made her entrance. She was known in high circles not for her achievements, but for her connections, her fashion, and the way she commanded attention the instant she appeared. Her gown shimmered under the chandelier lights, an expensive creation that sparkled with every step. Diamonds draped from her ears and neck, glittering like they were meant to remind everyone of her wealth. The staff who had just escorted the CEO's mother away now rushed to welcome the socialite. They bent low, their voices filled with admiration as though royalty had stepped into the hall. "Right this way, Miss Caldwell," one of them said, practically glowing with pride. They guided her down the aisle, ignoring the whispers spreading through the crowd, ignoring the unease of the guests who had witnessed the humiliation moments earlier. The CEO watched from his seat. His jaw was set, his hands folded tightly in his lap. His eyes followed every step the socialite took, not out of admiration but out of disbelief. A woman who had sacrificed nothing for him was being honored with the seat he had saved for his mother, the woman who had given him everything. His mother, now seated several rows back, lowered her head. She could feel eyes on her, some pitying, some judgmental. She tried to disappear into the shadows, her pride quietly wounded. She whispered a silent prayer, asking for strength, reminding herself that she had endured worse indignities in her lifetime. But her son had not brought her here to be shamed. He had brought her to be honored. The socialite, unaware of, or unconcerned about, the storm brewing, lowered herself gracefully into the VIP chair. She smiled at the cameras, adjusting her gown so the sequins caught the light. She waved casually to acquaintances in the audience, basking in the glow of admiration. To her, this was a normal evening, another gala, another opportunity to be seen, another seat reserved as her due. Around the hall, the tension was palpable. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances, whispering behind their glasses. They had seen what happened. They knew whose mother had been asked to move. And yet, none of them spoke up. That was the cruel truth of such places. Status often silenced morality. The CEO leaned back in his chair, his silence sharper than words. His eyes were on his mother, sitting humbly in the shadows, her hands clasped in her lap, trying to hide her pain. He remembered her bent back from years of scrubbing floors. He remembered the nights she had gone hungry so he could eat. He remembered the pride in her eyes when he first told her she would sit beside him tonight. And now, here she was, pushed aside for a woman who contributed nothing but her vanity. The socialite crossed her legs elegantly and leaned back, satisfied with the attention. She did not once glance at the back row, did not see the quiet woman whose dignity had been stolen for her comfort. She lifted her champagne glass as a server rushed to pour, her smile glittering as brightly as her jewels. But the crowd could see the CEO's expression. His stillness was unnerving. He was not the kind of man to shout or create drama without reason. He was known for precision, calculated moves that left lasting impact. Guests whispered among themselves, wondering what he would do. A few who knew him well leaned back in their chairs, almost nervous. They had seen that look before, in boardrooms, in negotiations. It was the look he wore just before making a decision that changed everything. 5 minutes passed. 5 long, tense minutes. The socialite laughed lightly at a comment from her neighbor, oblivious. The staff straightened their jackets, proud of their work. And in the back row, the CEO's mother sat quietly, her dignity bruised but her heart full of patience. And then the CEO moved. He pushed back his chair with deliberate calm, the scrape of it against the marble floor cutting through the soft music. Every head turned. The orchestra faltered. Even the socialite, mid-laugh, paused and glanced his way. The moment was coming. The moment that would turn humiliation into a lesson, arrogance into downfall, and silence into justice. The music swelled again, the hall glittered with light, and laughter floated from the decorated tables. Yet for one woman seated far in the back, the world felt heavy. The CEO's mother sat stiffly on the edge of her chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She tried to smile faintly at those around her, but her eyes betrayed the storm inside. Every sound, the clink of a champagne glass, the applause for a speech, the rustle of silk dresses, seemed to echo her humiliation louder and louder in her heart. She had never asked for luxury. Her entire life had been one of sacrifice and hard work. She had bent her back scrubbing floors, cleaned houses that were not her own, and taken on jobs no one else wanted, just to make sure her children had food and schooling. Many nights she had gone to bed with an empty stomach so her son could eat. When he was young, she would tell him stories in the dark, masking her own hunger behind a smile, whispering, "One day you'll make it and all this struggle will mean something." And he had kept his promise. He had risen step by step to become the man who now held the title of CEO. Tonight was supposed to be her moment too, a night where she was not hidden in shadows but honored at his side. She had dressed carefully in her best outfit, though it was simple compared to the glittering gowns around her. Her son had looked at her with pride, telling her, "Mama, tonight you sit in the front row. Tonight you are the guest of honor." She had walked into the hall trembling but excited, believing him, allowing herself to feel the weight of years finally lifting. And then the staff came. Their words were polite on the surface but sharp in meaning. "This seat is not for you. Move to the back." It wasn't just about a chair. It was about dignity. In those few moments, they had stripped her of the honor her son had tried to give her, reducing her once more to someone unworthy, someone invisible. Now she sat in the back, her eyes lowered, trying not to meet the gazes of those who had seen. Some guests looked at her with pity, others with indifference. No one spoke up. The humiliation burned deep inside her, sharper than any insult she had ever endured. She wanted to stand tall, to tell herself it didn't matter, but she felt the sting of tears pressing behind her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. She had cried enough in her life, and she would not let this grand hall see her weep. She glanced at her son in the front row. His face was calm, almost too calm. She knew that look well. It was the same look he wore as a boy when someone had bullied him in school, and he had stayed silent only to come home later and work harder, study longer, rise above the insult. But this was different. This was her dignity on the line, and though she wanted to protect him from conflict, she also knew he would not let this pass. Her heart ached with a mix of pride and fear. Pride because she knew her son valued her above everything, and fear because she sensed the storm brewing in his silence. She wanted to lean forward and whisper across the hall, "Let it go, son. It's not worth it." But the truth was, it was worth it. Dignity was always worth it. Around her, the whispers continued. Some guests muttered in disapproval of the staff's behavior, others shrugged it off as the way of the world. The socialite in the front seat sparkled under the chandeliers, basking in attention, utterly unaware of the pain sitting just a few rows behind her. The CEO's mother pressed her hands tighter together, as if holding herself steady. She remembered every sacrifice she had made to raise her son, every insult she had swallowed quietly. She had done it all so he could stand tall in rooms like this. But tonight the insult was not hidden in shadows. It was open, public, meant for all to see. And that made it harder to bear. Still, she sat quietly, her back straight, her eyes lowered, her dignity clinging to her like a fragile shield. She told herself she could endure it, just as she had endured so much before. But what she did not know was that her son was no longer the little boy forced to swallow injustice. He was a man now, a man with power, and he was about to show the room what respect truly meant. The hall glittered on, but beneath the chandeliers and polished speeches, something had shifted. The CEO sat in the front row, his body perfectly still, yet every guest near him could feel the tension radiating from his presence. It was the kind of silence that spoke louder than words, the silence of a man who was holding back a storm. His mother sat several rows behind him, her thin frame straight in her chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. From a distance she looked composed, but her son knew better. He knew the quiet way her lips pressed together, the way her eyes lowered, hiding pain she didn't want the world to see. He had seen that same expression years ago when she worked herself to exhaustion, or when neighbors mocked their poverty. She had always endured in silence. But tonight, he felt every ounce of her humiliation as though it were his own. Around them, whispers slithered through the hall. Guests leaned toward each other, their words low but urgent. Did you see what they did to his mother? They pushed her out of the front row, for the socialite. It was disgraceful, but will he do anything? Some shook their heads, muttering that in places like this, appearances mattered more than justice. Others leaned back nervously, recognizing the dangerous stillness in the CEO's expression. They had seen him in boardrooms before, at negotiating tables where silence meant calculation. He was not a man of rash words, but when he chose to act, his decisions were final and absolute. The staff who had carried out the insult stood proudly near the aisle, chests puffed with importance. They whispered to one another, pleased with how smoothly they had handled the arrival of the socialite. To them it was routine. To them, his mother had simply been an inconvenience, a mistake corrected quickly. They did not notice the CEO's eyes lingering on them like sharp blades, memorizing every face, every uniform. The socialite herself was entirely absorbed in her own glow. She laughed lightly at comments from those seated near her, adjusted her gown so it caught the light, and smiled for the cameras that occasionally swept across the VIP section. She had no thought for the woman she had displaced, no awareness of the ripple of unease spreading through the crowd. 5 minutes ticked by slowly, each one heavier than the last. The orchestra played, but the melody seemed thin, lost beneath the undercurrent of tension. The CEO remained motionless, his gaze fixed forward, his hands resting on his knees. To those watching closely, it was clear he was waiting for the right moment, waiting until the silence in the hall was so deep that his voice would pierce it like thunder. His mother lowered her eyes, whispering prayers under her breath. She wanted him to let it go, to leave the insult buried, but in her heart she knew he would not. He had promised her dignity tonight. He had promised she would sit beside him as his honored guest. And his word was not something he broke, not in business and certainly not when it came to her. Guests leaned back in their seats, their eyes darting between the mother in the shadows, the son in the front row, and the staff standing smugly nearby. Even those who had tried to ignore it at first now felt the air grow heavy, as if the chandeliers themselves were waiting for something to fall. Then the moment came. The CEO slowly shifted in his chair, his back straightening further, his head lifting. The scrape of wood against marble rang out as he pushed his chair back. It was such a small sound, yet it cut through the hall like a strike of lightning. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the orchestra faltered, the violinist's bow slipping across the strings with a jarring note. All eyes turned toward him. The silence was absolute now, thick and expectant. The CEO rose to his full height, towering in his calm authority. His face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with a fire that promised change. He adjusted his suit jacket with deliberate precision, his every movement carrying weight. The staff who had dismissed his mother stiffened nervously. The socialite blinked, suddenly aware of the tension that seemed to circle around her. The CEO's voice when it came was calm and steady, but it rolled across the hall with the force of a storm. Enough. The single word echoed under the chandeliers, and in that instant, everyone in the room knew, the insult given 5 minutes ago was about to be answered. And the answer would be final. The scrape of the chair against the marble floor still echoed when the CEO straightened to his full height. The hall, moments ago alive with chatter and music, fell silent as if someone had drawn a curtain over the sound. All eyes locked on him. Even the orchestra stopped mid-note, their instruments dangling in frozen hands. The air itself seemed to tighten, waiting for what he would say. The black CEO stood tall in the front row, his shoulders squared, his jaw set. His gaze did not waver, fixed first on the staff who had dared to humiliate his mother. His silence had been their comfort these past few minutes. They mistook it for acceptance. But now, as he adjusted the lapel of his suit and stepped forward, they realized too late that his stillness had only been the calm before the storm. 5 minutes ago, his voice rang out, smooth but sharp as steel. My mother was sitting in the seat beside me, the seat I brought her here to honor her with. The seat I promised her. His eyes swept across the hall, and the weight of his words pressed down on everyone present. But she was told she did not belong there. She was told to move, to the back. A ripple of shame stirred among the audience. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others lowered their eyes, unwilling to meet his piercing gaze. His words carried no shout, no anger, but the authority in them was unmistakable. The CEO turned slightly, his hand gesturing toward the back where his mother now sat. She raised her head slowly, her eyes glistening with tears she was too proud to shed. That woman, he continued, his voice deepening, is the reason I stand here today. She is the reason I rose from nothing to everything. Every success I have earned, every empire I have built, rests on her sacrifices. And yet, tonight in this hall, she was treated as if she was nothing. The crowd held its breath. Even the socialite in the front row, who had been basking in attention just minutes earlier, shifted uneasily in her seat. The jeweled smile on her lips faltered. She glanced at the staff beside her, suddenly aware of the hostility in the room's silence. The CEO's gaze cut back to the staff who had carried out the insult. His eyes were like fire now, sharp and unblinking. For stripping my mother of her dignity, for shaming the woman who gave me life, I have no tolerance. If you cannot respect her, you cannot serve me. If you cannot honor her, you cannot honor this event. His hand lifted slightly, his voice like thunder cloaked in calm. You are dismissed. All of you. Effective immediately. Gasps erupted across the hall. Guests leaned forward in shock. The staff members' faces drained of color, their proud posture collapsing into disbelief. One of them stammered, Sir, we were only following instructions. The CEO cut him off with a raised hand. Instructions? Whose instructions told you to humiliate a mother in front of her son? Whose instructions gave you the right to decide who belongs and who does not? There are no instructions for cruelty. Only choices. And you chose wrong. The silence that followed was louder than applause. Security, already alerted by the CEO's nod, moved swiftly. Within moments, the staff were escorted out, their uniforms vanishing from the polished hall like stains being wiped clean. The CEO turned then, his eyes softening as he walked toward the back. Every step he took echoed with purpose. When he reached his mother, he extended his hand. She looked up at him, hesitant, her lips trembling. But he only smiled faintly and whispered, Mama, come back to where you belong. He led her back to the front, guiding her with the same care he had shown when they first entered. But this time, no one dared to question, no one dared to stop him. When she sat once more in the VIP seat, the hall erupted, not with whispers this time but with applause. Genuine, thunderous applause. Some clapped out of respect, some out of shame, but all of them recognized the power of what had just taken place. The CEO raised a hand and the applause quieted. His voice carried the weight of generations as he declared, No business, no empire, no fortune is greater than respect. And no one, no matter their status, their wealth, or their name, has the right to take that away from my mother. The chandeliers above seemed to shine brighter at his words. The hall was no longer just a gala, it was a courtroom and justice had been served. 5 minutes of silence had led to a lifetime lesson. The moment the words left the CEO's mouth, you are dismissed. All of you. Effective immediately. The hall erupted into chaos. Gasps echoed against the marble walls, glasses were set down with sharp clinks, and the quiet rustle of gowns and suits filled the air as guests leaned forward in disbelief. The staff who had escorted his mother away froze where they stood, their faces pale, their arrogance draining away as if someone had pulled the floor from beneath them. Just minutes earlier, they had strutted with confidence, proud of their obedience to power. Now their knees felt weak, their eyes darting nervously across the crowd that watched their downfall. The head usher, a tall man with stiff posture, tried to step forward. "Sir," he stammered, "there must be some misunderstanding. We only wanted to accommodate." "Accommodate?" The CEO's voice cut through him like a blade. "You call stripping my mother of her dignity accommodation? You call humiliating the woman who raised me following orders? No." He shook his head slowly, his gaze burning. "There is no misunderstanding. You chose vanity over respect. And in my world, that choice has consequences." He raised his hand in a small but powerful gesture. Security, who had been standing at the edges of the hall, moved in instantly. They weren't aggressive, but they were firm. One by one, the staff were approached and guided toward the exit. Their crisp uniforms, once symbols of service, now looked like marks of shame as they shuffled toward the doors under the weight of hundreds of eyes. The socialite shifted in her seat, her jeweled smile gone. For the first time that evening, she looked uncomfortable. She glanced at the CEO, but his eyes did not meet hers. His attention was fixed entirely on his mother, who sat quietly beside him once more, her hands trembling. The applause that had followed her return to the front row had not stopped echoing in her ears. The hall was alive with whispers now. "Did you see that? He fired them, all of them, right here. They deserved it. How could they treat his mother that way? This is going to be talked about everywhere tomorrow." The CEO let the noise settle, standing tall and unshaken. His presence commanded silence once more, and soon the whispers died down. He turned to the crowd, his voice steady and clear. "Let this be remembered," he said. "No one, no staff, no host, no guest, has the right to take dignity away from another human being. Not for money, not for status, not for appearance. Tonight, my mother was insulted in front of all of you. And tonight, she has been restored to the place she deserves. Not because she is my mother, but because she is a person worthy of respect." His words struck the audience like a hammer. Heads nodded. Eyes lowered in shame. Some clapped softly again, building into another round of applause, louder this time, not out of surprise but out of admiration. Meanwhile, the dismissed staff filed out of the hall, their heads bowed. The sound of the heavy doors closing behind them was final, like a gavel in a courtroom. Their absence left the room strangely lighter, as though arrogance itself had been pushed out with them. The CEO's mother sat in silence, her heart torn between emotions. She felt pain for the humiliation she had endured, but also a deep pride for her son. She had raised him to value dignity, and tonight he had proven it to the world. Tears gathered in her eyes, but this time she did not hide them. They were not tears of shame, they were tears of pride. Guests leaned closer to one another, whispering words that carried both respect and awe. "This is why he's not just a businessman. He's a leader." The orchestra, unsure whether to resume, waited for a signal. Finally, the CEO nodded once and music filled the hall again. But the night had already changed. The gala would be remembered not for its chandeliers, its gowns, or its speeches, but for the 5 minutes of silence that led to the dismissal of an entire staff. The CEO sat back down beside his mother, placing his hand gently over hers. She looked at him with trembling lips, wanting to speak but unable to form words. He leaned close and whispered, just for her to hear, "No one will ever make you feel small again, Mama. Not while I'm here." And in that moment, the hall that once felt like a palace of privilege became something greater. A place where justice had stood tall, where respect had triumphed over arrogance. The chandeliers glittered as though nothing had happened, the orchestra's soft notes drifted back into the air, and the servers moved quietly along the edges of the hall. Yet everyone present knew the gala had transformed. It was no longer a night of empty speeches and sparkling gowns, it had become a stage for something unforgettable. All eyes were still on the Black CEO, seated proudly at the front once more, his mother beside him in her rightful place of honor. The staff who had humiliated her were gone, escorted out in silence. The sting of their arrogance lingered only in memory, replaced now by a heavy hush of reflection. Guests who had once smiled and gossiped now sat straighter, their expressions serious, even humbled. Some felt ashamed for not speaking up when they saw the insult. Others silently admired the courage it took to defend dignity so publicly, in front of the powerful and the privileged. The CEO rose again, slowly, and the room stilled instantly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm authority carried to every corner of the hall. "Tonight," he began, his tone steady, "my mother was moved from this seat, not because she was unworthy, but because someone believed status mattered more than respect. They believed wealth mattered more than humanity. He paused, scanning the crowd. That belief is wrong. He gestured gently toward his mother, who sat with quiet grace, her eyes wet with pride. This woman scrubbed floors and washed clothes so I could stand where I stand today. She gave up meals so I could eat. She gave me everything she never had. And yet tonight, she was treated as though she was less than a guest, less than a person. I want everyone in this room to understand, no achievement of mine means anything if the woman who raised me is disrespected in front of me. Murmurs rippled through the hall, soft but filled with agreement. The CEO's voice grew stronger. Respect is not given because of the clothes we wear, the titles we hold, or the color of our skin. Respect is the right of every human being. And when you take that away, you don't just insult the person, you reveal your own lack of worth. He let the words hang in the air, giving them weight. His gaze swept the room, sharp and unyielding. Some of you here may measure power by the cars you drive, the money in your account, or the names you are seated beside. But true power, true leadership, is measured by how you treat those who cannot give you anything in return. The applause began softly, a few claps here and there, but it grew quickly, rolling across the hall like thunder. Guests stood to their feet, some moved to tears, others bowing their heads in respect. Even those who had doubted him at first could not deny the truth of his words. The CEO raised his hand again and silence returned. His voice softened now, but it carried even deeper. My mother deserved this seat not because she is the mother of a CEO, but because she is a human being. And I will say this clearly, if you cannot respect my mother, you cannot respect me. If you cannot honor her, you cannot honor anyone. He leaned slightly forward, his eyes narrowing. Tonight was a lesson. Not just for the staff who are no longer here, but for all of us. Dignity is not negotiable. Respect is not a privilege, it is a right. The hall erupted again in applause, louder and more genuine than before. People rose from their seats, clapping, some even cheering. The socialite, who had sat uncomfortably through the speech, lowered her gaze, her jewels suddenly feeling heavier than gold. The CEO turned and sat beside his mother once more, placing his hand gently over hers. She looked at him with trembling lips and whispered, "I'm proud of you, son." And with that, the story of the gala spread beyond those crystal walls. The next day, headlines would not talk about gowns or chandeliers. They would speak of the CEO who defended his mother's dignity and reminded the world that respect was worth more than fortune. The entire city would remember the night when 5 minutes of silence ended with a lesson powerful enough to outshine every diamond in the room.